Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Chase with Jace. I'm your host, Jace Lejeune, obviously a beat writer for LSU for Gridiron Football, here with ESPN 1045's Taylor Sharp. And I know Taylor is going to be joining us a whole lot throughout the season. I know we've talked a lot in the off season when he's had to fill in for off the bench or after further review, and we've had a lot of really good conversations about LSU and the Tigers this year. Definitely had to return the favor and have Taylor on to talk about the LSU Tigers. Taylor, a lot of expectations set into the season. You know, everybody talks about year three under Brian Kelly being that key third turnaround year that he really takes the program to the next step. But it just feels like you go watch the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. You know, just like over and over again. Fifth straight year on really the last 5 years, but the last three under Brian Kelly that the Tigers started the season with a disappointing loss this time to USC. Taylor, just your first reactions to another what seems like it's becoming a habit nowadays for LSU fans.
Jace, it's one of those things where people are like, are you going to let 19 and 20-year-olds determine your mood for the next 5 months? Yes, I absolutely am. And, you have such a build-up all off season. You go to spring practice, you hear about the summer workouts, you go to fall camp, and then it almost feels like it's over before it starts when you lose your first game. It is just so deflating to the team, to the coaching staff, to the fan base, to us in the media that have to cover this team. It's a tough look. I mean, this is 5 years in a row that LSU fans have gone through this, and every year under Brian Kelly, it's such a weird game, because me and you were actually talking right after the Brian Kelly press conference earlier today. If you would have told me that Garrett Nussmeier threw for 300 yards, 75% completion, and no turnovers, and the defense held USC to 27 points, I would have said LSU won this game by multiple touchdowns. And, for whatever reason, that did not happen. I mean, I guess the biggest takeaway would be LSU made plays until they really needed to make plays. And then they kind of stalled out for whatever reason, whether it was a lapse in coverage on defense, whether it was stalling out on offense due to a penalty. They did not seem prepared for a big moment like this.
Yeah, and that was interesting that Brian Kelly said that the first thing he said in his press conference was, "We thought that we were prepared. I mean, we were prepared. We were ready to play the game. We were like everything. Like they played well. They played hard." And I was like, "Well, I don't know if we were watching the same game, but at moments like you pointed out, and like I mentioned in my post game article about it, was that LSU played well enough to win the game." And really go back and look at it, really should have won the game if you go back and they played well enough. So we're going to talk about some of the positives, talk about some of the positives, some of the negatives. I'm a half glass full type of guy. I always like to look at the positives. And you just mentioned one of the positives earlier, Taylor, and that had to been the play of Garrett Nussmeier. I mean, you go and look at his stat line. You just talked about it is good enough to win you games. I mean, it was 29 for 38, 309 yards, two touchdowns. I don't count the last interception because it is what it is. Like the last 8 seconds to try to push the ball downfield. I mean, it's kind of expected. So I'm not really counting the last interception, but he was pretty much near flawless on that first drive, moving the ball downfield. LSU moved the ball downfield, but Garrett Nussmeier, he looked really sharp, especially since this is the first start of the season, and you can always really see him getting better throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, no, he looked great. I believe he was actually 7 of his first 8 passes, if I remember correctly. He came out the gate scorching, and it's a little disheartening because not only did he come out so hot, when you came back out in the second half, it almost seemed like the coaching staff was like, okay, Nussmeier did good. We are waiting for him to make a mistake, so we're going to take this ball out of his hands. We're going to take the game out of his hands. On the other side of things, Lincoln Riley trusted his quarterback in Miller Moss. He trusted him to go down the field and make plays, and that's why USC ultimately won this game. They let Miller Moss loose in the second half. I feel like it was kind of reversed. You let Garrett Nussmeier go out there and let it rip, and then you kind of pulled back on the reins a little bit. I did not agree with that decision. I think Garrett Nussmeier is too good of a quarterback to really kind of put him in a bottle like that and limit what you're allowing him to do downfield.
Yeah, and we saw it through fall practice. I mean, there were times where I mean Nussmeier was looking like he did throughout the majority of the game. On Sunday, and you saw some of those interceptions in practice, and that was probably, like you mentioned, that was probably on the back of Joe Sloan's mind. It's like, okay, he's a gunslinger. That's who he is. Like, is he going to make a mistake? Like, it seems like to your point, they were playing prevent offense there, but I mean, Garrett Nussmeier, he had like two throws maybe throughout the course of the game. He probably said would like to have back, especially late in the game when he had Anderson open in the flat, and really could have been a touchdown if you go back and look at how open Aaron Anderson was. But obviously, another positive from this game was the play of Kyron Lacey, especially in the first half. We were talking about how he has made the right moves in order to be that number one option for LSU, that receiver one. And early on, I think Lacey was targeted like 5, 6 times on the opening drive alone. And it boggles my mind why he wasn't even part of the game plan in the second half. I believe only 2 targets in the second half. But Kyron Lacey and his play, to me, it seemed like he officially took his chance, cement his spot as a wide receiver one on this team.
No, he definitely did. And we've been talking a lot about bright spots, whether it's Garrett Nussmeier or other players. Maybe the biggest bright spot was Kyron Lacey, because we did not know coming into the season if he could handle being that wide receiver one. Now, we had seen flashes of it. He was the number 3 the last couple of years behind Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. And you and I, we had been out there at fall practice. We knew what Kyron Lacey was capable of doing, but you never know for sure how it's going to translate over into a real game situation on a big stage. Like when you were out there in Las Vegas, the stage did not look too big for him. And honestly, USC could not cover him in the second half whatsoever. I thought he was excellent. I thought that was one of the biggest mistakes in the game. Like, if I have I guess my biggest critique of Joe Sloan, other than trying to manufacture a running game when you knew it wasn't there, was the inability to get your best playmaker the ball in the second half. You saw USC do it in the first half with Zachariah Branch. He's not a downfield receiver, but what did they do? They threw him 5 passes in the first half. 4 of them were screen passes, and they all went for big yardage. That is a prime example of how a good coaching staff and good play calling can get a player in space, and it doesn't necessarily have to be downfield all the time. I was a little disappointed in that.
Yeah, I mean, there like with the offense, right? I mean, we can point to it. There were some negatives we're going to talk about. I mean, positives. You look at the passing game was very efficient. I mean, Garrett spread the football not only to Kyron but to a lot of receivers. Aaron Anderson, it was great. I thought it was great to see Aaron Anderson have a couple pretty cool catches, including scoring a touchdown. And a play that nobody's going to talk about is that third down catch he made on 3rd down and 4. We'll go back and talk about this game. That's going to be a play that's always going to be lost in the shuffle just because of what the result was. But you have him having his best game as a Tiger. John Emery, nobody expected John Emery to be the leading runner in this game. Everybody was talking about Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams, and expected that those are the 2 guys. Even Caden Durham. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Caden Durham even in there and being that guy over John Emery, but happened to be John Emery been the one that really ignited the rushing game for LSU. So it was encouraging to see those type of performances offensively. And then, any positive notes on the offense from the loss?
John Emery was the most surprising positive, if I will, in this game on Sunday. You and I had been out there at fall practice, and it wasn't that John Emery didn't look good. We know that he's talented, but he had that big brace on his knee. And I mean, you remember it as good as I do. He'd get in there for 2 or 3 plays. He would tweak that knee a little bit. He would have to go sit out. I didn't see any of that on Sunday. He looked explosive. Yep. He looked strong. He was cutting on that knee really well. Maybe it was one of those things they just wanted to hold him back in fall practice and make sure he was ready for the game. He was by far the most impressive running back. And like you mentioned, fans didn't expect it. The media that was out there at fall practice certainly didn't expect it. It opened my eyes a little bit, though. I thought he looked really good on Sunday.
Yeah, very encouraging. And Brian Kelly said he's only get healthier and he's looking really good, which you really love to see, just knowing his story and the perseverance he's really been through. A lot of ups and downs in his LSU career. So 6 years at LSU, and you really hope for him that he has himself a really good year. Defensively, another positive had to been when we saw it in fall camp. Taylor, was the play of Savion Jones. We read about how good of a camp Savion has really had, but and really in my pregame article, Taylor, I said my X factor in this game was Savion Jones and Braden Swinson. And Savion Jones really stood out. He had 2 sacks, had that bad pass on 4th down to really, you would think, give LSU the momentum and really put them in position to win. But I mean, you have to like what you saw from Savion Jones off the edge.
Oh, 100%. And you mentioned it as we continue to go back to fall camp because that's the only time that we were able to see these guys. Savion Jones was winning reps pretty consistently against Emory Jones in fall camp. As far as your starting 4 goes, if you will, between him, Swinson, Gio Paez, and Jacobian Guillory, he was the only one that was consistently winning those reps. And look, I get all the talk is about Will Campbell. Emory Jones, who I actually thought had the best game of those two on Sunday. He was consistently winning those reps. You saw it again on Sunday night, and he lined up on either side of that defensive line. He was an end on either side, and he made plays regardless of where he was. It's something that we really wanted to see a year ago, right? I mean, that was something that was brought up under Matt House was, hey, watch out for Savion Jones. We know the disconnect between Matt House and the players. It never materialized last year for whatever reason. He's going to be a problem this year, and it showed up early.
And it really went into the defense overall. And Blake Baker's debut, that was going to be a question of how this defense will look. And you're playing against one of the best play callers, offensive minds in the country in Lincoln Riley. And they had obviously their explosive offense in USC with all their explosive playmakers. But for the most part, LSU's defense really held their own. I mean, gave up 27 points. Of course, they gave up the yardage, and Miller Moss looked really good on Sunday night. But considering that you go into the game, if you said LSU's defense would give up 27 points, knowing what you had offensively, you would think nine times out of 100 is like they were going to take that and their offense was going to score. Just offense wasn't able to score.
Yeah, you mentioned it going against a play caller like Lincoln Riley, a quarterback who what we saw in the bowl game against Louisville turned out to not be fool's gold. Like we were all hoping it was
Yeah,
going to be.
right,
Miller
right.
Moss is a heck of a quarterback. I think Blake Baker's defense played about as good as anybody could realistically expect them to play. There was some lapses in the secondary. We expected that. I thought coming into this game that actually the secondary and not the D line was going to be the weakest part of this team. That really did show up. But, by and large, I was really impressed with Blake Baker. This defense is only going to get better. And most importantly, they were just worlds better than what we saw the last 2 years.
And it was encouraging seeing guys like Ashton Stamps had his moments. Like you see the potential there. He never gave up on the play where it looked like USC was going to score a touchdown. Had a pretty impressive PBU in the end zone. And then PJ Woodland, he was thrown into the fire. He had a pass interference, and they attacked at him again, and he bounced back. Man, nice PBU. So there were some good moments there. Mentioned the defensive line. You just mentioned defensive line, Taylor. We talked about the edge guys and Savion Jones, but really Brian Kelly even alluded to it as well, but he was impressed with the interior guys. Gio Paez made some plays in the backfield. Jacoby and Guillory. I mean, that's probably one of my biggest surprises from Saturday night was how the interior played, or Sunday night.
Yeah, and when you watched them 11 on 11 during these preseason practices, 7 on 7 and 11 on 11 were drastically different because of the defensive line. I mean, this is something that we saw a few times. We're wondering if it was going to translate over into the game, which fortunately for LSU, it ultimately did. There's not, stars on this team. I don't think anybody's going to be all conference. There's not 2 or 3 guys you're like, hey, you're going to lose early to the draft. But what I think this defensive line does have is about 6 or 7 guys that are all kind of even. There's not much of a drop off, whether it's Swinson and Jones on the edge. You pull them out. You put in Paris Shand. He made some plays as well. You feel good about those guys, whether it's Guillory, whether it's Gio Paez, whether it's a JVR Suggs. He got some playing time as well in the middle of that defense. Like, you don't have a superstar, but I think you have 6 or 7 really solid pieces. I think Bo Davis has done a great job with this group in fall camp, and I think they're going to surprise a lot of people.
Absolutely, and we're joined with Taylor Sharp, 104.5 ESPN. I know we've joined Taylor a couple of times when he had to fill in as host after further review off the bench. We're glad to do it and appreciate him for allowing us to come on. And Taylor, now we talked about some of the positives. We're going to talk about obviously the negatives. The positives got you to a position where you're up 17-13, got you a chance to close the game at the end. But unfortunately for LSU, in this case, it was the negatives that prevented you from closing this deal and also chance to really win this game, which was really a winnable game for LSU throughout. I guess the first thing I have to say, my biggest disappointment was the offensive line and run like in as far as creating holes. I mean, we talk about the pass protection. Pass protection was great. Garrett Nussmeier, I don't think he was really even touched one time throughout that
No,
game.
I mean they were phenomenal in pass coverage all night long.
Yeah, they were. It was just about run blocking, which was a little bit disappointing, knowing that a lot of the talk throughout that whole game week, Will Campbell said that we're going to really punch him in the mouth, and this is going to be a war, and we're going to bring it to him, and we're going to run the football, and there's no secret about that. And really, LSU did struggle on the ground without, I mean, besides that 39-yard run from John Emery and a couple runs from Emery, and I think he had one like 15-yard run from Josh Williams. Besides that, I mean, it was really tough to get anything going on the ground.
Yeah, it really was, and we had seen the run blocking last year. This was a really good run blocking team. I mean, you saw what Jaden Daniels did, but not just him. Logan Diggs had a nice year behind this offensive line. We know Josh Williams can run the ball when the holes are there. Caleb Jackson had a nice year. It just like the offensive line to me took a step back in the running game. As good as they were in the passing game, I'm with you. I think the running game really left a lot to be desired. As far as the defense goes, Jace, my biggest disappointment as far as like what I did not expect in this game, I was disappointed in Jordan Gilbert. He
Yeah,
was really good in fall camp. In fall camp, you, me, anybody else who was on the sidelines was saying, okay, Jordan Gilbert is locked down at that one safety spot. Is it going to be Jordan Allen? Is it going to be Deshaun Spears? Are they going to find a corner and be able to move Sage Ryan back to safety? It was never a question with Jordan Gilbert. He was your most consistent player in fall camp. I thought he had a really, really rough game. I actually thought Jordan Allen was
yeah,
the better of the two safeties, not Jordan Gilbert. I thought Jordan Gilbert really struggled, and I did not expect that.
yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you there. I was really surprised by that he's struggling, and that Jordan Allen was actually going to be the better safety in the game. That really surprised me. Really surprised me there. But you did see Deshaun Spears, and it's going to be a dynamic like what they're going to do there. I mean, Sage Ryan, you're going to put him back at safety. I think you've seen good enough things knowing that you threw out PJ Woodwin. He had a couple pass interference calls, but he responded back and with some positive plays. So they put PJ Woodwin out there against Nicholls and give him the start, and that also considering Jordan Gilbert, he's not going to start the first half of the Nicholls game because of the targeting penalty. So that's going to be I'm sure one of the biggest topics when we talk about the Nicholls State game coming up this week is how they're going to handle that. Are they going to move Sage at safety? They're going to give a start to PJ Woodwin or J.K. Johnson or somebody like that. When does Zy Alexander come back? Like that's going to be a lot of questions, but you definitely feel good about Ashton Stamps being out there as one of your cornerbacks. Another thing as well is it felt a lot like the Saints last year, early in the season with the offense, right? You're moving the ball
Yeah.
in between the 20s, going right up and down the field, but its inability to really punch it in and really put an exclamation point on those drives, get touchdowns instead of field goals. We saw with Brian Kelly doing the opening drive of rolling the football, receiving the coin toss, receiving the football, going right down the field, and going for and fourth down and not executing there. They left a lot of points off the board in the red zone. Obviously, the last drive of the game had a chance to go up ahead, 24 to 17 or 24 to 20. But then do that there, had the tie and sell for a field goal there too. So it's inability to execute in the red zone. That kind of, I guess, goes along with the running game with being able to really punch it in and power your way into the end zone. LSU didn't do that on Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, there's at one point in that game, you had been inside the 15-yard line 3 different times, and you came away with a total of 6 points. That is not winning football games, and that's ultimately what LSU's downfall was. We talked about it. USC was able to make the plays when they needed to. They capitalized off of your mistakes way better than you capitalized off of theirs. They went down the field. They didn't settle for as many field goals as you did. They got touchdowns on the board. Even that last drive when they could have settled for a field goal, they were able to punch that in as well for a touchdown. That was one of the biggest disappointments because last year you were really good with the red zone, and I get it. Jaden Daniels was there. His ability to run really opened that up, but I thought you took a major step back in that area.
Yeah, and really the overall play. I mean, you've had moments, and that's why I said in my post, my reaction article the very next day. The title headline I put LSU had its moments, but you can say lack of discipline, you can say lack of consistency, and just a killer instinct, right? I mean, LSU was in prime position, right? They get the turnover on downs. They're up 17-13. Your defense just made a big stop. And then your offense, knowing your strength heading into the season, everybody was talking about was the offensive line, uh, and you go 3-and-out. And I just feel like at that moment, that was when you lost all the momentum that you built yourself up to, and lacking that killer instinct. LSU had opportunities to really put this one to bed twice, and they didn't. And then, like you said, USC made the plays. LSU, like the biggest plays in this game, LSU didn't. USC did. LSU went 3-and-out twice, and USC scored 14 points. So that was the difference in this game. It's the lack of killer instinct that Brian Kelly talked about.
Well, you mentioned LSU had the ability to put this game away. Whenever I hear people say that, whether it's yesterday or today, I go back to one specific series, or really two specific series, when Nussmeier hits Aaron Anderson late in the third quarter to go up 17-13. You get that, and the people I'm watching the game with, I look at them, I'm like, if you can get USC into a 3-and-out and then go down the field and score, you can put this game to bed.
Yep.
The defense did exactly that. USC punts, it's 3-and-out, you get the ball back, you're like, okay, let's go down this field and score. You make it 24-13 there. It would have been an 11-point lead heading into the fourth quarter. In my opinion, you score right there, you win the game. That's going to do it. You can lean on that running game a lot more because that was right when John Emery started getting a feel for it a little bit. You could have leaned on him a little bit more. But what happened? You had to settle for a field goal. It's 13-20. Then USC goes down the field. They score a touchdown of their own. Boom, just like that. It's tied 20-20. So instead of a 24-13 lead, it's tied 20-20 in the fourth quarter. I thought that was a huge turning point in this game.
Yeah, and you had, I think, that sequence at the very end where LSU could get that touchdown, right, to take the lead. And then you really didn't burn any time because Nussmeier misconnects with Anderson, I believe, on second down. And you had a 2-minute warning, and you try throwing again. There was a legal shift, too, with the incompletion to Kyron Lacey. And you had to settle for a field goal, and the game's tied at 20. And you look, and you realize USC has all three timeouts, about a minute 40 seconds, and plenty of time. So, I mean, it felt pretty deflating. Even though the defense, you felt good about the progress they made throughout the game, they weren't in position yet to, like, hey, close this one out for us. They weren't in that position yet to do that.
No, it was one of those things we talked about earlier. Blake Baker has done a great job with his defense. I think they are much improved. I think they've looked better on Sunday than they did at any point last football season, but they are not good enough to where you're like, we need to win this game because of our defense. You don't necessarily have to win it in spite of the defense like you did last year, but I think there's somewhere in the middle. It's a cool middle ground. You cannot expect a group like this that does lack a little bit of that top end talent in certain positions to come through for you time and time again. Your offense put them in a bad spot, and USC was finally able to take advantage of that. Jace, my big issue, I guess, we can talk about positives and negatives all day long.
Right.
The dumb penalties, whether it was Kyron Lacey scoring a touchdown, acting like he was shooting USC, he gets flagged for that. On that kickoff, that was the one that Zachariah Branch ran back to about the 50-yard line. They wound up getting points off of that drive. Major Burns, who, look, I don't want to be somebody who's overly critical of some of these college players. Major Burns has been in this program for too long, and frankly, he's not good enough to be acting like that on the field. I mean, to take your helmet off and taunt people, we've seen it time and time again. I mean, a lot of times Major Burns is more of a liability than he is a playmaker out there, just due to the attitude that he kind of plays with, right? And then even Will Campbell. I mean, a guy like Will Campbell who's supposed to be a leader, wearing number 7, 2 false start penalties. I think that's the same amount of penalties that he had all of last season. He had them in the first game alone today. He was only penalized twice all year long. USC really bailed you out on one because you were 1st and 15. They jumped off sides on the very next snap and went back to 1st and 10. But just mental mistakes right there, and it was mental mistakes that USC did not make.
And you elaborate. You mentioned it, Taylor. Those were all veteran players. It's one
Yeah.
thing. It's like, okay, it's a freshman coming in their first ever game, making those mistakes. But it's your three of your core guys, like you mentioned, Major Burns, Kyron Lacey, Will Campbell. I mean, those are mistakes that are easily preventable. So that's what makes it even more frustrating about those. And that was and obviously a negative from that. And it just seemed like it was choppy. Like the whole game was choppy for LSU. Anytime the offense looked good, the defense there was no complimentary football. When the offense had its plays, the defense was struggling. When the defense was stepping up, the offense was non-existent. So it just seemed like they were not feeding off each other. It wasn't complimentary football for LSU.
No, it really wasn't. And look, it was more than just the penalties that I just laid out. I mean, Kyron Lacey coming in motion when he wasn't supposed to. Garrett
Mhm.
Nussmeier held up his hand and
Yeah,
said
totally.
stop, and Kyron went ahead and went anyways. He ignored him. Nuss thought about taking a timeout. He didn't. He wound up snapping it. That was kind of a mental error on both guys. But when your quarterback tells you, like, hey, go back, you go back. You get back like your hair is on fire. You do not do that. Kyron ignored him for whatever reason. I didn't like to see that. Jace, as far as like attitude throughout the game. I'm watching it and like really at no point did I think LSU was going to lose this game. When
Yeah.
I thought LSU was going to lose this game, God bless him, he played such a good game. But when Garrett Nussmeier threw that ball in the dirt out there in the flats to Aaron
Yeah.
Anderson
I knew it.
on 3rd and 8, you had to settle for a field goal in that drive. When you settled for a field goal to tie it instead of take the lead, you lost the game right there on that play. That
Mhm.
play lost you the game. Now, that is unfair for Garrett Nussmeier because, I mean, hell, the guy completed 76% of his passes. You cannot expect him to be perfect for an entire game. But when you had to tie it,
Came out worst
when you
time.
had to tie it at 20, you knew that was it. I mean, you
Mhm.
knew that was it. Your defense was not going to be able to hold up, and that's ultimately how it played out.
Yep, exactly. And like you mentioned, Garrett Nussmeier had a great game, and that was one that he liked to take back. That just happened to be the one. And like you said, it was LSU made plays, but whenever they needed to make them the most, obviously the third down run on the next drive after the 4 and out, and you get stuffed. I think Kempton missed his block. Wow, John Emery get tackled for a loss, like those little things like that. And that paid to be that's what happens. Is the little things. Is whoever makes the bigger plays in those type of games, and USC was able to do more of that. And LSU in what was an even game. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we talk about Nicholls Taylor is special teams. I actually was pretty pleased with the special team in this game, knowing that was definitely a liability for this LSU team under Brian Kelly. I mean, Aaron Burrell stepped in. I thought he looked good. I mean, he kicked it out of the end zone. And how about him on the tackle? I mean, that's no easy feat when your first ever game as a freshman. You have to try to tackle Zachariah Branch, but he did that one-on-one. And I think it's a relief for LSU fans. It looks like you have yourself a guy out there returning punts that can not only return, like catch them, but he has the ability to make plays. And Davion Thomas that was a refreshing play to see him
The
make plays.
first return of the game. I mean, the opening kickoff, he was brought down by a shoestring tackle. If he's not brought down, I mean, he may have taken that one all the way back. As far as the kicker goes, Jason, I'm going to be very honest with you. I didn't even watch a ton of Aaron Burrell in fall camp. I mean, I see 32 making a tackle. I'm looking up the roster. I'm like, is this a guy that plays another position that just has a big leg? So they put him in there because of the penalty. I'm looking it up and I'm like, I remember the name Aaron Burrell. I was like, I just don't remember seeing him in practice. He was excellent. Damian Ramos was good.
He was
Was
clutch.
a little confused by the punting situation. I mean, we saw Blake Oxendorf and Peyton Todd a lot in practice. It was basically exclusively Peyton Todd in this first game, which was a little odd because I thought he was the least consistent of the two in
Mhm.
fall camp. That was kind of my biggest knock on the special teams. But as a whole, I mean, you got to be excited about where you're at.
Yeah, well, very encouraging signs. And Damian Ramos, I mean, I don't think he gets enough credit. I mean, he's made clutch kicks in his career at LSU, and that was a clutch one to tie that game late. So obviously, you're not going to remember that because of the scoreboard and what happened. But tough loss for LSU. Once again, 5 straight years of dropping the season opener. And it's a deflating way I even text you this. It's a deflating way to start the season. It really is, and it's sad that you, at one point, LSU under the Les Miles era, you're used to playing these big games in week one and winning and dominating these games. Like LSU was the big bully, in the Les Miles era when it comes to week one, and not a lot of teams were able to beat them in week one, and now was kind of on the other end of the joke, dropping these week one games. But it's going to continue because they got Clemson the next 2 years. So we're going to see if the streak ends next year. But the good news is for LSU, now as we're moving on to Nicholls State and talk about the Colonels, the good news is for LSU is that you have the expand college football playoff, and you still can maybe afford another loss. You could still afford another loss and still look pretty good for college football playoff. And really, there's some bright moments that you still feel really good about this LSU team moving forward.
Yeah, you do. The problem with the whole college football playoff thing, like you said, you can afford another loss, but that's it. And then you look on LSU's schedule. I get it. Florida's really bad. I don't even think you're going to face Billy Napier when you play Florida. I think he's going to be out of there by then. You don't play Auburn, you don't play Georgia, so you're good there. But I mean, I get it. They're at home, but when you play Alabama, you got Ole Miss, Texas A&M, as bad as their offense looked, I think they have the best defensive line in all of college football, at least from what I've seen as far as week one goes. And Jackson Arnold looked really good at Oklahoma. Expecting this team to go 3-1 in those four really, really tough coin flip games is a tough ask for that team. And that's assuming that they get everything else done and don't have a slip up along the way as well. I mean, I hate to be Debbie Downer after week one. I had LSU at 10-2 this year, but I had them winning this game. We both talked about that. I don't think LSU makes the college football playoff this year.
Yeah, it makes sense, and that's the biggest thing about losing that USC game gets you, because you start the season, it's no margin of error now. You go and win that USC game, you have a positive springboard into the season. You go and look, hey, we can go undefeated going into Ole Miss, and it's like, hey, even when we slip up against Ole Miss, we can go the rest of the way undefeated. But now, there's just no margin of error. You can afford maybe one more loss when you're talking about the playoff, but that's about it. And when you're playing now, the good news is you do play your toughest games, I feel like, at home. I mean, your toughest games are Ole Miss and Alabama, but still it's the SEC. I mean, Texas A&M is going to be tough on the road. You mentioned Oklahoma. I mean, I guess we could talk a little bit about Vanderbilt. I mean, Vanderbilt even looks pretty good now.
They looked good. Jace, I actually had to host OTB this morning for Jake and T-Bob, and one of the segments I wanted to look at was coaches on the hot seat. And no, I'm sure as much as LSU fans wanted me to, I did not put Brian Kelly as one of the coaches on the hot seat. He's not on the hot seat. That's not happening. But, obviously I had Billy Napier on there. But as far as teams in the SEC, I don't see how South Carolina gets an SEC win this year. I really don't. I was looking at their schedule. I mean, Brock Vandagriff looked pretty good at Kentucky. He's better than what you have in Lenora Sellers. I was looking at their schedule this morning. I don't know who you can beat in this conference if you're Shane Beamer. I think Shane Beamer's in trouble.
Yeah, when you're showing against Old Dominion, it's going to be a tough season for the Gamecocks, and that's the good news for LSU. But the thing about LSU fans is that they're not going to be satisfied no matter what LSU does until Ole Miss. The Ole Miss game approaches.
Yeah.
You have a winnable stretch. I mean, you mentioned South Carolina did not look good in their season opener, but they won. I mean, UCLA, they did not look good in their season opener. You have Nicholls. I mean, you have South Alabama. So you have those teams, right? But you're not going to be satisfied as an LSU fan until you see what you hold up against Ole Miss at home.
Yeah, exactly. That's the next big stepping stone, if you will, right? Because you have Nicholls this week. You have South Carolina on the road. It's an 11 a.m. on the road game, so I understand that can be a little bit tricky for people, but South Carolina looked really bad. Then you come back for South Alabama. You should win your next three. No issues whatsoever. The Ole Miss game is kind of your next big testing point, if you will. I mean, that's really going to show where you're at. Yes, it is in Tiger Stadium, but you also have Jackson Dart coming in his third year with Lane Kiffin, which
Mhm.
I got to be honest, I don't know if Lane Kiffin's had a quarterback in his system for that long, and
Yeah,
quarterbacks continuously get better under Kiffin. So that is going to be a tough game for sure. I don't know about that one.
yeah, it's gonna be tough. And I said before the season that I can see LSU staying Ole Miss and Alabama, and I had LSU defeating USC, so I had them going 10-2 as well. And then with this loss, like, well, it was like 9-3 as par for the course, and another 10-win season. So we'll see how that kind of shapes out the rest of the season. Now, Nicholls, obviously LSU is going to. They can. The question is not whether LSU is going to win or lose this game. They're going to win this game. The question is by how much, and we'll see and how it looks. That's basically the question going into this one against Nicholls. Obviously, you're not going to get too much from this, and there's a conversation about maybe you should have started the season with a team like Nicholls, a tune-up game, which I agree with. I think you got to figure out what you have as a team. You got to be able to see another jersey and play a different team out there before you play against a team like USC or a team like Florida State. I think it does benefit you having that extra because you improve from week 1 to week 2. So I think it does improve having that extra tune-up game to get ready for another opponent.
Yeah, as far as like what I'm watching against Nichols, you brought it up earlier, and it was something that I hadn't really thought about, but I've kind of been thinking about it in the back of my mind since you
Mhm.
brought it up. With Jordan Gilbert suspended for the first half of this game, and you were at the press conference just like I was, Kelly raved about PJ Woodland. If they decide to start PJ Woodland at corner next to Ashton Stamps, do they move Sage Ryan back to safety? Is it
Mhm.
Sage Ryan, Jordan Allen? Is it Sage Ryan, Deshaun Spears? Or is it Jordan
Yeah.
Allen and Deshaun Spears? Those are
Right.
the spots to watch. Who's the corner opposite of Ashton Stamps, and who are your two starting safeties? That's something I'm going to be watching. Another big thing, who's going to be the first quarterback off the bench when they pull
Yeah.
Garrett Nussmeier out of this game? Hopefully they pull Garrett Nussmeier out of this game. That
Oh
means
yeah. Oh yeah.
you've done quite well. Hopefully you do not need him for
Maybe
this
a half.
entire game.
See him a
I
half.
personally think it's going to be AJ Swan. A lot of people think it's going to be Ricky Collins.
Mhm.
Either one of those guys, because you may need some of those guys, knock on wood, at some point in this year. So that's kind of the two things I'm watching: the safety rotation, the corner opposite of Stamps, and who's going to be the first one coming in for Garrett Nussmeier.
I saw a lot of fans were asking for Garrett Nussmeier to run more. I was like, well, knowing your backup situation, I mean, you're hoping that Garrett Nussmeier's jersey as clean as ever. So
Well, that's the thing, right? That
right,
people aren't considering.
right,
Everybody's going to say, well, Jaden Daniels was able to run last year. One, Garrett Nussmeier can't run like Jaden Daniels. Two, Nussmeier was the backup to Jaden Daniels, so you felt a lot better about it a year ago than
hmm
you do now. That's something that people are not considering. Would I like to see him run? Sure, 2-3 times tops a game. I don't need Garrett Nussmeier pulling it 12 times on a quarterback keeper.
and I think he realizes that too. So is that there are
Yeah.
opportunities for him to run, and he can run. It's not like he's Zach Mettenberger and he's a statue back there. Like he can run.
No, I mean, he can run. Like, yeah, does he have to be Jaden Daniels? No. Can he
No.
be Baker Mayfield? I mean, Baker
Yeah.
Mayfield's one of those guys in the NFL you don't consider to be a dual threat quarterback, but he can make a lot of things happen on the ground. He did it a ton at Oklahoma. He's continued to do it in the NFL. I mean, can he be a guy like that?
Yeah, that's a good comparison. So that's obviously the biggest thing I'm looking at too defensively. I agree with you. I'm seeing how LSU manages that safety situation with Sage Ryan, and if he moves to safety, you start PJ Woodland. He's a freshman. This is a perfect opportunity for him to get his first start against Nicholls State. Offensively, Brian Kelly talked about the press conference, and you heard about it too while you were there, Taylor. But Shelton Sampson. I mean, I feel like this is a big game for Shelton Sampson. Really look good, knowing that there are some injuries right now at the receiver position. They're basically holding off on Chris Hilton as a precautionary injury, make sure he's 100% because he's your biggest downfield weapon that you have. And then Kyle Parker, injuring his elbow as well. So this is a prime opportunity for Shelton Sampson this Saturday.
Yeah, it really is. Kyle Parker had a really good fall camp. He dropped some passes early on, but once he kind of got that figured out, He looked really good. He caught 2 passes early on in this game against USC. To have him go down, I think, is a bigger loss than a lot of people realize right now, especially if Chris Hilton can't go. Because who do you have outside of Lacey? You have CJ Daniels, who's going to start. Is he going to be in the slot or on the outside? That's going to depend on Shelton Sampson because you have Xavier Thomas and Aaron Anderson. I view those guys more of slot receivers than I do on the outside. If one of those guys steps up, then you got to move CJ Daniels out wide. If Sampson could step up and be that big time threat on the outside, you can leave CJ Daniels right where he is. So not only is it important to find that third receiver, but it's important for CJ Daniels' development in the slot for a guy like Shelton Sampson to step up.
Yeah, that's going to be very, very important to keep, take an eye on. Before we go, Taylor, I appreciate you joining in. I know it was last and everything. Have a great conversation about the Tigers. Anything else that you're looking out for and keeping your eye out on against Nicholls on Saturday?
Yeah, because it was something that I noticed once the game was over. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it, during the game. There was a lot of other things on my mind. He's a guy that we watched to get rotation at the DB spot pretty consistently in fall camp. Jace, I don't know if he was hurt. I don't know if it was a discipline thing. Brian Kelly said everyone was available. Did you see J.K. Johnson on Sunday?
I did.
I did not see J.K. Johnson at all. And honestly, Jace, a lot of times when they would scrimmage and do the 11 on 11, sometimes he was out there before Sage Ryan. I mean, there was times where he was running with the starters. I was very surprised we did not see J.K. Johnson.
Yeah, I was too. I mean, we saw Jair Brown out there. I mean, we saw obviously P.J. Wendland out there. So you saw other guys out there in the secondary. You saw Deshaun Spears out there getting some time in there too.
And I thought J.K. Johnson had a really good fall camp.
Yeah, me too. I mean, besides Ashton, he was probably
he may have been your best corner in fall camp.
Yep, in fall camp, I thought he was your best performer there. Obviously, big disappointment to start the season for LSU. But I guess you're kind of used to it at this point in the last 5 years. But good news, LSU, Brian Kelly, they've gotten better over the course of the season. And like a couple years ago, Brian Kelly's first year, they dropped the season opener to Florida State. Did not think that they would compete for an SEC championship, but they did. So It's a long season. There's a lot of football still left to be played. LSU is still going. I feel even more encouraged even after the loss than I did the previous 2 years, knowing how it looked. So feel pretty good. I mean, obviously feel bad, but considering the rest of the schedule, LSU is going to be hanging around there in contention at the end.
Yeah, they are. They're going to be a scrappy team all year long. Whether they win 10 games, whether they go 7-5, they're going to be a scrappy team. They're going to be in pretty much every game. I don't see this team getting blown out by anybody because of how dangerous of a weapon Garrett Nussmeier is on offense. What you have to do is, like you mentioned, play complementary football. When your offense makes a play, can your defense also respond with a play? If your defense gets a big turnover, can your offense capitalize on it? If you can do that, you're going to win a lot of football games.
They're playing complementary football, playing a couple strings together. So that's going to be key for this team moving forward. And we'll see if they can develop that killer instinct that Brian Kelly was talking about earlier. Taylor, I appreciate you jumping on with me. It was really good to get a chance to talk about the LSU Tigers and the season opener. And I'm sure we'll be talking with you a lot throughout the season about the LSU Tigers. And I know we'll be talking a lot on Friday nights because I know me and Taylor call a lot of Pittsburgh Knights game on Fridays. So it's going to be an interesting season. It was a good Jamboree win to start off for the Knights.
Dude, I'm excited about it. I'm ready to go for Friday night.
Absolutely, Taylor. Appreciate it. Taylor Sharp, ESPN 1045. Thanks for having them on. And we appreciate y'all watching this episode of The Chase with Jace. And we'll catch y'all next week as the LSU Tigers take on the Nicholls State Colonels. And we'll be looking ahead and talking about South Carolina next week.